In a previous video, I showed how to add an embossed effect to a logo in Inkscape, but with that method, the logo had to be a single path, and we couldn't use the logo's color in the effect. In this video, we'll use a different method to get a similar effect, but without those limitations. To start, I imported the image that I want to add a logo to. If you want to use the same image, you can find a link to it in the description box below, or you can try this out on a different image. Okay, so first, I want to crop out most of the image so that I can focus on just the business card part. To do this, I'll create a rectangle covering the area that I want to keep. Now I'll go to the Select tool, select both the rectangle and the image, then right-click and choose Set Clip. Alright, now let's create a logo over here for now. We'll keep it simple so that we can focus mainly on the embossing part. First, we can go to the Text tool and create a text object. I'll set the font to something like Cambria, make it bold, then go to the Select tool and scale it up while holding Ctrl to maintain the aspect ratio. And for now, I'll give the text a goldish feel. We can always change the color later. Next, I'll duplicate the text object by right-clicking it and choosing Duplicate. Then I'll move the duplicate down here, change the text, make the style normal, and shrink it down a bit. I'll make this one a medium gray. Finally, I'll go to the Stars and Polygons tool and create a star up here. I'm holding down Ctrl to snap the rotation angle. Now make the star blue. To align these objects vertically, we can select them all, open up the Align and Distribute dialog, and click this button. Then we can move the objects onto the image and adjust the rotation and size. Okay, so to make these objects appear to be embossed or engraved in the image, we first need to add some shadows and highlights that match those of the image. Let's start by selecting the large text. We can add shadows to it using the Drop Shadow filter by going up to the Filters menu, then down to Shadows and Glows and choosing Drop Shadow. Before we change anything in the Options tab, let's go to the Blur Color tab here. We want to make sure that the color is set to black with an opacity that's less than 100%, and we want the Use Objects color option here to be unchecked. Now let's go back to the Options tab. In here, we want to make sure the shadow type is set to Outer. Let's go ahead and check Live Preview down here. Alright, so the light in this image appears to be coming from the top left. Therefore, we want the shadows to appear to the right and bottom of the letters. First, let's make the blur radius pretty low so that the shadows aren't too blurry. To put the shadows on the right, we need to use a positive number for the horizontal offset, and to put them at the bottom, we need to use a positive number for the vertical offset. And we'll need to use small numbers so that the text doesn't appear to be floating. Okay, when we have something that looks good, we can apply it by clicking the Apply button down here. Now let's add some highlights to the opposite sides of the letters, so the top left. We can also do this using the Drop Shadow filter by changing the color of the shadow to white. So let's head over to the Blur Color tab and change the color to white by dragging the value slider all the way to the right. Then let's go back to the Options tab. For the highlights, we want them to appear on the inside of the letters, not the outside like we did with the shadows. To do this, we need to change the shadow type to Inner. And because Inner does the opposite of Outer, we can keep the offsets positive to make the highlights appear at the top left. Now let's check Live Preview. That looks pretty good, but we can adjust the blur radius and offset values a bit if we want. And if the highlights are too strong, we can go to the Blur Color tab and lower the opacity some more. Okay, let's click Apply and close out of the dialog. Now let's do the same for the other text. So let's select it and open the Drop Shadow dialog by going to Filters, Shadows and Glows, Drop Shadow. And we can start with the highlights this time. So let's check Live Preview and adjust the settings if necessary. Okay, when we're finished with the highlights, we can click Apply. Then let's work on the shadows by changing the shadow type to Outer, changing the color to black, checking the preview, and adjusting any of the other settings as needed. Alright, now we can click Apply and close out of the dialog. Finally, for the star, instead of making it pop out of the image, like with the text, let's make it appear pressed into the image. To do this, we'll need to flip the positions of the shadows and highlights. So first, let's select the star and open up the Drop Shadow dialog again. For the shadow, we want it to be inside the object at the top left. To do this, we simply need to change the shadow type to Inner. Now we can check the preview and adjust anything else if necessary. Okay, now let's click Apply. For the highlight, let's change the shadow type to Outer, change the color to white, check the preview, and make any necessary adjustments. Then we can click Apply and close out of the dialog. Alright, the shadows and highlights are done, and the mockup is already looking pretty good. But to make it look even better, we can add some texture to the objects that matches the texture of the image. To do this, let's again start with the large text by selecting it, then let's hold Shift and click the image to also select it, and let's duplicate them by right-clicking and choosing Duplicate. Now let's right-click again and choose Set Clip. Next, in the Fill and Stroke dialog, let's go down here to the Blend Mode option and change it to Overlay. If we zoom in, we can see this adds the texture from the image onto the text, but the color is a bit too dark right now. To fix this, let's go up to the Filters menu, then down to Color and choose Lightness Contrast. This allows us to adjust the lightness and contrast of the selected object. The defaults are 0, which means no adjustments, as we can see if we check Live Preview. And to make the color of the object brighter, we simply need to increase the lightness value. Okay, when we're satisfied, we can click Apply and close out of the dialog. Now let's do the same for the other text. So let's select it and the image, duplicate them, then right-click and choose Set Clip. Now let's change the blend mode to Overlay and add the lightness contrast filter. And finally, let's repeat the same steps for the star. Now if we want to change the color of one of the objects, for example the large text, we can first select the texture object above it. And now if we hold down Alt and click the texture object again, it will select the text object underneath it. And now we can adjust the color of the text. Okay, so that's how we can create a logo mockup with colors in Inkscape. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.